In the early morning hours of October 27, 2006, Deputy Jeff Mitchell, a 38-year-old beloved father and husband, was patrolling a remote area in Sacramento County when he noticed a suspicious white van. At 3:27 a.m., he reported pulling the van over, but minutes later, dispatch lost contact with him. When fellow deputies arrived at the scene, they found Jeff lying near his patrol car. He had been shot with his own weapon after a violent struggle, and the van was gone. 12 hours later, a white van was found submerged in a nearby river with 2 bodies inside. However, it was eventually determined that neither person was involved in Jeff's murder, deepening the mystery. It's been almost 18 years since Deputy Mitchell was killed in the line of duty, and investigators are still searching for the people responsible. Hey everyone, welcome back to Detective Perspective. My name is Derrick Levasseur. I'm a licensed private investigator and former police detective. Each week I'll be covering an unsolved case in story format. I'll then give you my perspective on the investigation and provide contact information for the individuals or organizations connected to the case so that if you have any tips, you can contact them directly and maybe you can help solve a case. So if you're someone who's interested in true crime, specifically unsolved cases, and you would like to hear my opinion on those investigations, please consider subscribing whether you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever platform you use. Okay, Deputy Jeff Mitchell. I'm not going to spend too much time on this opening. I don't think it's hard to connect how I relate to Jeff as not only a former police officer, but a father. I understand what it's like to work in this profession. It's extremely dangerous, and it's not hyperbole to say you really don't know if you're ever going to see your loved ones again when you go to work. And that can happen in any job, but I think we're lying to ourselves if we don't say that the likelihood of something happening that could affect you or your family is higher in jobs like law enforcement or first responders or firefighters, things of that nature. It comes with the job. It's a decision that we personally make to do so. You know, we're not asking for credit for doing it, but it's the reality of the situation. And as far as this case is concerned, it's a head scratcher. I've gone back and forth on this one. In fact, usually after I start researching the case and I kind of figure out where I'm going to go with it, Haley will reach out to me and say, "What'd you think of that case?" And in this particular investigation, when I talked to her, I had told her one theory as far as some of the things involved with this case. And spoiler alert for her, whether she watches or listens to this episode, I'm actually changing my direction a little bit from what I told her. So sorry about that, Haley, but you're going to find out when everybody else does this week. Now, as far as the actual case is concerned, there's some major developments in this one. And we don't always get this, but I'm a little concerned because either this development is the smoking gun or it's a red herring. And depending on what it is, it could end up being the reason the case is solved, or it could be the reason the case is never solved. I'm looking forward to giving you guys all the facts, all the information, and hearing your thoughts on this one because depending on when I read it, I can go either way. And as far as why I'm covering this case now, well, I'm assuming a lot of you already figured that out. Next month will be the 18-year anniversary, and Jeff's family's still fighting for justice. So if I can do anything to contribute to that, I want to be there for them. And knowing that there'll probably be a little bit more coverage about his case around this time, I wanted to get this out there so that when people are searching, they're able to find it. But let's not waste any more time. Let's dive into this week's case. Jeffrey Vaughn Mitchell was born on May 28, 1968. Growing up in California, Jeff was known for his athleticism, bright smile, big heart, and fun personality. After graduating from Westmont High School, Jeff went to serve in the United States Air Force as a security officer. He was also the cleanup hitter for his squadron softball team. After 5 years of service, Jeff left the Air Force and pursued a degree in education at California State University in Sacramento. It was during his time there that he met Crystal, the woman who would later become his wife. After earning his teaching certificate, Jeff began working as a substitute teacher at local schools. His patience, passion, and sense of humor made him a natural in the classroom. In 1995, Jeff and Crystal got married, and a few years later, Jeff decided to continue his career in public service by joining the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. Now, initially, he worked as a recreational technician at Rio Consumnes Correctional Center. Then on March 26, 2000, Jeff was promoted to the role of sheriff's deputy. Crystal later told the Sacramento Bee that Jeff loved being a deputy and he took his responsibilities serious. He always gave people the benefit of the doubt and never lost his bright smile. That same year, Jeff and Crystal welcomed their first and only child, a son named Jake. Jeff's devotion to his son was evident. He even kept a picture of Jake attached to the back of his badge. This is something that when I first read it, it personally spoke to me because this is something a lot of police officers do. I know with me, when I was on patrol, I always kept a picture of my loved ones in my hat. Crystal later told the Sacramento Bee that Jeff was, quote, everything as a person you would hope a dad would be. He taught Jake how to be a good person and a kind person, and he made sure there wasn't a day that went by that he didn't spend time with us. In 2003, the Mitchell family settled into a new home in El Dorado Hills. Jeff shared his love for sports, especially baseball, with Jake and other families in the neighborhood. They often played catch outside or went to local baseball games, and Jeff even coached Jake's Little League team. Again, something that I can personally relate to. I've been coaching Tenley's softball team for years. So there's just a lot of connections between me and Jeff, and not that there's not a connection with every victim I cover. I always find that way to relate to them as a person. But with this one, it really just, it's kind of scary how much we align. Now, on the evening of October 26, 2006, Jeff spent time playing baseball with Jake in the neighborhood. That night, Jeff went to work the overnight shift, a schedule he chose so he could pick up Jake from school and have dinner ready for Crystal when she got home from work. In the early hours of October 27th, Jeff was patrolling the area near Meiss Road and Dillard Road off Highway 16 in rural Sacramento County. Now, it's important to note this area, it's extremely remote. There are no streetlights, and there's just miles of rolling fields. The roads are paved, but there are no painted lines to guide drivers. According to the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department, at 3:27 a.m., Jeff used his cruiser's computer to contact dispatch. He reported that he had pulled over a suspicious white Chevy van that didn't have a license plate. Now, every state is different, but in California, vehicles are required to have both a front and back plate, but unfortunately, Jeff didn't specify which plate was missing. In addition to mentioning the plate, he only noted seeing one person in the vehicle, and at the time, everything seemed okay, but clearly it was not. Now, after reporting that he was out with the van, dispatch didn't hear from Jeff again. However, 7 minutes later, a dispatcher picked up the sound of Jeff's radio clicking. And I have to tell you, I have heard this sound many times, and a chill runs right down your spine. If you hear that an officer is out with a vehicle or out at a call, and all of a sudden you start hearing the radio clicking, the first thing you think is that that officer's in a fight, because that's usually what happens. The radio is either on your belt, or in my case, it was always across my chest. So if I'm fighting with someone, it's really easy for that microphone to be bumped. And so when we heard that sound, it was code 3 to wherever that police officer was located. Now, the dispatcher tried radioing him back, but there was no response. They also called him on his cell phone, but again, there was no answer. Based on these circumstances and the lack of response, dispatch sent officers to Jeff's location. But unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, Jeff was in a remote area, so it took officers about 13 minutes to arrive, and in law enforcement terms, 13 minutes can feel like a lifetime. We're just getting started in the story. There's a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Have you or someone you know been a victim of identity theft? Been harassed, stalked, or doxxed? Or are you someone who's just looking for better ways to protect yourself online? As a person who exists publicly, especially as someone who shares his opinions online all the time, I am super aware of safety and security, and that's why I personally use Delete Me. And regardless of what you may think, your data is being shared online. Make no mistake about it. Your name, contact info, social security number, your home address, even information about your family members, it's all being compiled by data brokers and sold online. And that's where Delete Me comes in, because with this subscription service, you're removing your personal info from hundreds of these data brokers. All you have to do is sign up and provide Delete Me with exactly what information you want deleted, and their experts will take it from there. Delete Me sends you regular personalized privacy reports showing what info they found, where they found it, and what they've removed. I get my personal report each and every month, and I love looking through the data to see not only how many times my personal information was located, but how many times they were able to remove it. And I will tell you, it can be a shock to some people. I know for me personally, last month I had over like 1,200 spots where it was found, and they were able to remove almost everything within that month. So Delete Me really does a great job. And this isn't just some one-time service. It's always working for you, constantly monitoring and removing the personal information you don't want on the internet. So take control of your data and keep your private life private by signing up for Delete Me, now at a special discount for my listeners and viewers. Today, get 20% off your Delete Me plan by texting DETECTIVE to 64,000. Again, text DETECTIVE to 64000. One more time, that's DETECTIVE to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Now, when officers finally got to the scene, the white Chevy van was gone, but they did find Jeff lying near the back of his patrol car. He had been shot once in the head with his own weapon, and Jeff was still alive, but just barely. Unfortunately, his vehicle was not equipped with a dash cam, so no one knows exactly what happened. However, based on the evidence at the scene, it was clear that he had been involved in a bloody, violent struggle for his life. Now, an interesting piece of information that we can talk about is the fact that Jeff's handcuffs were out, suggesting that he might have been patting down a suspect at the rear of his car when the violent struggle began, but at some point the suspect got a hold of Jeff's gun, shot him, and fled the scene. So as far as these handcuffs are concerned, it could be just that. He could have been removing the handcuffs from his belt as he was patting this individual down, maybe to secure them so they couldn't buck on him in the middle of the search. It could also be a situation where, based on what Jeff had observed, he brought the driver or the passenger, whoever it was, to the back of his vehicle to try to get them away from maybe someone else who was in the car, and was attempting to put handcuffs on the suspect, knowing that this was going to be an arrestable offense. And when the suspect heard the clanging of the handcuffs, that's when the fight was on. I've had that happen to me before. Sometimes, especially if you think the individual could be violent, you try to be subtle when you're removing your handcuffs, but unfortunately, the retention system that's designed for the handcuffs that keeps them in place, it also has this very distinct sound when you're pulling them out, as they kind of like the clamshell opens and then shuts, and that clanging of the little, the chain that connects the two handcuffs. If someone's been arrested before, they know that sound. They know it's coming. We've all heard it even on TV. So the minute you pull them out of your belt, that's enough for the individual to know, okay, he's about to put me in handcuffs. I got to do something. So that also could have been what's going on. It may not have just been a pat down for weapons, maybe just a cursory search. It may have been Jeff trying to enact an arrest, and in the process of doing so, that's when he was shot. Now, because of his injuries, Jeff was airlifted to the hospital while multiple deputies went to his house to let Crystal know what happened. Crystal rushed to the hospital, but upon her arrival, she was told she couldn't touch Jeff. They needed to preserve any evidence on his body. She was by his side when he was pronounced dead at 4:45 a.m. Now, I don't want to make a big deal out of this because we're getting this secondhand. I understand why the preservation of evidence would be so important here. But let's be honest, if this is true, and I wrote this in my notes here, this is kind of stupid. You could cancel out any DNA or any trace evidence that Crystal left behind on Jeff. Obviously, she would have a reason for it to be there. If she had killed Jeff, it wouldn't have mattered because her DNA would have been all over him anyways. So I really hope this isn't true. I hope this is just misinformation. Again, I understand you want to keep the integrity of the case, but you have doctors and paramedics and pilots from the helicopter. Everyone's DNA and trace evidence is going to be everywhere. I don't think his wife's DNA is going to make the difference. So I won't make a big deal out of it. I wanted to mention it because it definitely raised an eyebrow. I really hope that wasn't true, because my personal opinion, if someone told this man's wife that she couldn't touch her husband when it was pretty apparent that he wasn't going to make it, that guy needs to calm down a little bit. I think he takes his job a little too serious. I understand you want to get the bad guys. I don't think this would have made the difference. Just my 2 cents. Now, while this is unfolding, hundreds of law enforcement officers from multiple agencies, including the FBI, launched an intense search for Jeff's killer or killers, as well as the white van he had pulled over. Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger immediately offered a $100,000 reward, which was later raised to $225,000. Roadblocks were set up by officers, and they stopped every white van they could find, while highway signs flashed the message, quote, "Officer shot, white Chevy van, no plate." Investigators also processed the scene on Highway 16. They took evidence from behind Jeff's patrol car where the struggle took place and processed his car as well. According to reports, a DNA sample and a, quote, "good set of fingerprints" from a, quote, "key item at the scene of the shooting" were obtained and sent off for testing. Now, to this day, we don't know what that item was. According to ABC 10, around 12 hours after Jeff was killed, a couple who had seen the alerts about the white Chevy van contacted the police and reported seeing a full-size white Chevy van stuck in the Consumnes River below Highway 49 in El Dorado County. Given that this location was only 26 miles away from the area where Jeff was murdered, investigators believed that the van could be involved. Assuming the driver went the speed limit, it would have only taken about 28 minutes to get from Meiss Road to the spot in the river where the van was found. Obviously, investigators rushed to the scene, and when they arrived, they found the van submerged in 18 inches of water. Initially, it looked as though the van had deliberately driven off Highway 49 into the shallow river, possibly attempting to cross to the other side, but the vehicle had gotten stuck. Investigators noted that the van did have a back license plate, but the front plate was bent in a way that made it difficult to read. So at this point, it seemed likely that this was the same white van that Jeff had pulled over. Okay, I want to talk about this license plate thing because this is a big point of contention for me. I don't want to bury the lead. I don't want to get too far ahead because we have a lot more to cover as far as the specifics and what some detectives have said about this van in particular. And there's a shocking event about to happen with this van. But before we get to that, I don't want to forget this. I want to talk about these plates because to me, this could make the difference between this is the van or it isn't. So most of the time when we stop a vehicle as a patrol officer, the policy is to get behind the vehicle. It's an officer safety thing. You want to pull behind the vehicle, leave your driver's side slightly further out than the driver's side of the vehicle you're stopping. This creates a little area that protects you if a vehicle passes by at a high rate of speed. And it also allows you to do whatever checks on the vehicle that you want to do before exiting your patrol car. Because as I mentioned earlier, not every state requires a front and back plate, but all states require a back plate. So you know by stopping the vehicle from behind, you'll have the registration plate. You can run it through your computer system to see if it's registered, to see if it's stolen, to see what comes back on the registered owner, all that good stuff. So in my opinion, if Jeff had stopped this vehicle, more than likely he would have been behind it, whether it was passing him on the opposite side or it was going the same direction as him, he would have been behind the vehicle. Even if he was driving down the road and it was off to the side, I would think, I know what I would do, I would pull past it, turn around and get behind it. And based on the fact that he called out this stop from his computer, to me, I initially thought that was him behind the vehicle, stopping, having time to punch into the computer, hey, out with one vehicle, one occupant, no plate. Now, just to give an alternate angle, I don't know why he would have done this, but I guess he could have pulled nose to nose with this vehicle, but that would mean it wasn't a traffic stop. That would mean it was a vehicle parked on the side of the road, and instead of turning around, he pulled up in front of the vehicle and I guess was looking right at the driver. I've never done that unless it was an emergency situation or we were boxing someone in. I don't know why he would have done that. So that's a little odd to me. And that would be the only explanation as to why he wouldn't have seen the plate because it was bent up if this was the van. Because think about this. If he had done a traditional traffic stop, that would mean that he got out of the vehicle, walked to the front of the vehicle, past the rear plate, walked to the front of the vehicle, didn't see a plate, walks back to his car, then decides to type in on his computer, no plate. That doesn't make sense. He never exited his vehicle before punching that information on the computer, which makes me think it was more of a traditional traffic stop, but we weren't there. There was no dash cam. We may never know. But I say all this to say, as we continue on with this van, this was the first thing that made me question whether or not we do have the right van. Because when I first heard this, I was thinking it was missing the rear plate, and that's why he called it out, because it was important to note. But stranger things have happened. I could be wrong. I just wanted to put that out there. So back to this van. When investigators finally approach the van, they discover a shocking scene. There are two bodies inside. 43-year-old Alan Schubert, the registered owner of the van, and his friend, 28-year-old Nicole Welch. Now, according to the Sacramento Bee, Alan was found in the driver's seat while Nicole was curled up in a sleeping position in the back. There were no visible injuries on either body, so investigators theorized that the van's tailpipe had flooded while attempting to cross the river, leading to carbon monoxide filling the vehicle and killing them both. Now, I'm no expert on carbon monoxide poisoning. I've had very little experience with it in my career, maybe other than a suicide. But from my understanding, it can happen very quickly. It wouldn't take long if he was sitting there, pressing the gas really hard, trying to get out of this whatever muck that he was in, for the vehicle to fill up with carbon monoxide relatively quickly. And for anybody in the comments, correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding from my notes, within a couple minutes, you can get headaches, and within a couple more minutes, maybe under 5 minutes, you can pass out from it. So it would happen before they had a chance to even get out of the vehicle if they weren't attempting to do so. Now, if they went into the muck and immediately said, hey, we're getting out, they probably would have been fine. But if they were just in the car and they're stuck, he may have revved the engine a couple times, the windows are up, and that's how accidents can happen. So the investigators have this entire scene in front of them. Now they have these two bodies, and they initially suspected that Alan and Nicole might be responsible for Jeff's murder, since they found what appeared to be the same van that Jeff had pulled over. And the scenario seemed pretty straightforward. They killed Jeff, fled the scene, attempted to cross the river, got stuck, and eventually died from carbon monoxide poisoning. But investigators knew they wouldn't have definitive answers until the autopsies were completed. While waiting for these autopsy results, investigators started looking into Alan and Nicole's backgrounds. They interviewed friends and family members and dug into their criminal histories. Now, unfortunately, there's very little known about Nicole. However, when it comes to Alan, according to the Sacramento Bee, he was living out of that white van, which was filled with mechanics tools for odd jobs that he would do. And on the day he died, Alan was taking Nicole up to Jackson to visit friends. He planned on returning the next day because he had an upcoming court appearance in Sacramento. It's unclear what Alan was going to court for, but what we do know is that he had a criminal history spanning at least a decade, and it included charges for vandalism, DUI, and drug possession. Alan's family revealed that Alan hadn't driven with a valid license in over 10 years. However, they also emphasized that he had no history of violent crime, and given his experience with law enforcement, if he was pulled over, he wouldn't have fought if he was arrested. Alan's mother explained that he knew what the consequences were and he would have accepted them. Investigators also met with Alan's girlfriend of 10 years, Robin. They asked her how much money Alan had when he left, about his drug use, and if the couple had any problems. Robin said that Alan was a methamphetamine user and that he likely had between $300 and $600 with him because he was paid recently for a paving job. When asked directly if Alan would have killed Jeff, Robin said absolutely not. Alan was not a violent guy, and he didn't hate the police by any means. Based on everything investigators learned, it didn't seem like Alan and Nicole were the type of people who would kill a police officer. And when the autopsy results and lab tests came back, that possibility seemed even more unlikely. The autopsies confirmed that both Alan and Nicole had died from carbon monoxide poisoning, and their deaths appeared to be accidental. Notably, there were no signs of trauma to either of their bodies, and given the violent struggle that had occurred at the scene where Jeff was killed, you would have expected the suspect to have sustained visible injuries to their face or hands. So the fact that Alan and Nicole didn't have any injuries at all It really stood out to investigators. Now, on a positive note, lab results showed that technicians were able to recover DNA from the murder scene, but the sample was too small to build a full genetic profile. Additionally, the fingerprints they found did not match anyone in the national database, also known as AFIS. With these results, there was officially no evidence linking Alan and Nicole to Jeff's murder, and they were both ruled out as suspects. However, investigators and lab technicians continued to process the van, hoping to find evidence connecting to the murder. They speculated that a third or even a fourth person may have been present in the van when Jeff pulled it over, and that individual or those individuals could be responsible for his death. So there's a lot here to unpack, and I want you to stop the video or the audio right now and digest all of this, because here we have this white van that's found. You have two bodies inside, and yet their deaths look to be accidental. Are we to believe that these individuals killed Jeff and then in the process of fleeing the scene got stuck in the mud and died from carbon monoxide poisoning? It's possible, right? Maybe it's a sign from someone up above where, they took matters into their own hands and served their own judgment, but I don't know. To me, I have a lot of questions, not only with the fact that we know from what Jeff told us, his last words is that there was no plate. Not that the plate wasn't visible, not that the plate was bent, no plate. And yet this vehicle had both plates. And I believe more than likely he would have been behind the vehicle while conducting the traffic stop. And during that traffic stop, he would have removed that one person that he had seen, brought them to the back of his vehicle, and that's when everything went down. So if what I'm saying is right, and that is what happened, then this isn't the right vehicle. But if I'm not, and maybe Jeff did mean that the plate just wasn't visible, but it was there, then this is the van, and we could have a situation where they were able to get the drop on Jeff, but then they were too dumb to realize they were poisoning themselves in the process of fleeing the area. Or, as investigators have speculated, there were other people inside the vehicle who have yet to be identified. We still got more to go. There's more developments in this case as we go forward. Detectives eventually speak out about the case. We're going to dive into all that. But before we do, let's take our last break. Did you know that your temperature at night can have one of the greatest impacts on your sleep quality? If you wake up too hot or too cold, I highly recommend you check out Miracle Made's bed sheets. Inspired by NASA, Miracle Made uses silver-infused fabrics and makes temperature-regulating bedding so you can sleep at the perfect temperature all night long. Not only are these sheets temperature-regulating, they're also self-cleaning. As I just mentioned, they're infused with silver, which helps prevent up to 99.7% of bacterial growth, leaving them staying cleaner and fresher 3 times longer than other sheets. So yes, these sheets are temperature-regulating, they stay cleaner longer, but they're also extremely comfortable, but without the high price tag of other luxury brands, and they feel just as nice, if not nicer, than the sheets you find in some 5-star hotels. These sheets are specifically designed for your skin, so stop sleeping on bacteria because, listen, bacteria in some cases can be a good thing, but not here. We know bacteria can clog your pores, it can cause breakouts and acne. I don't want that, and I know you don't want that. So sleep clean with Miracle by going to trymiracle.com/detective to try your Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use my promo code DETECTIVE at checkout, you'll also get 3 free towels and save an additional 20%. And Miracle Made is so confident in their product, it's backed with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. So upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made by going to trymiracle.com/detective and use the code DETECTIVE to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40%. Again, that's trymiracle.com/detective, code DETECTIVE to treat yourself. Thank you to Miracle Made for sponsoring this episode. Okay, we're back from break, and I hope you've had a chance to absorb everything. And now that you've heard a lot of the case, I'm wondering if your brain is being torn in 2 different directions like mine has been. You can read the same information over and over, and every time you read it, you come to a different conclusion. If that's you, then welcome to the club. But let's keep it going because we got more to cover. In mid-November, Crystal, along with Jeff's mother, Mary Kay, spoke to multiple reporters to raise awareness that Jeff's murder was still unsolved. Crystal shared that thousands of tips had come in, but none of them had led to the person or people responsible for Jeff's death. She expressed how much it meant to her to find those responsible, saying, quote, "There's a 6-year-old boy who doesn't have his father. He's hurting. Jake needs, and I need the public to help us." Mary Kay echoed her sentiments, saying, quote, "Nobody forget about this. We have to keep this in the public's mind. That's how this person is going to be caught." And I just want to stop real quick and say that quote right there summarizes what we're trying to do. And I agree with everything she said. These older cases, we have to keep them on people's mind because if they're forgotten about, we're not going to find out what happened. So we have to keep them at the top of our list. We have to keep rotating all these cases to make sure people are aware of them because that's the only way they're going to get solved. Now, after these statements were made by Crystal and Mary Kay, the search for Jeff's killer or killers continued into the new year. By February of 2007, investigators told the Sacramento Bee that the manhunt for Jeff's killers had been scaled back. Now, only a few detectives were working full-time on the case. In March, the sheriff said they were still investigating the van from the river and its possible connection to the case. The sheriff expressed confidence that Jeff's murder would eventually be solved. He said, quote, "I'm very hopeful, but at the same time frustrated and agonizing over the fact that it's taken this long." The sheriff explained that many tips had come in suggesting the person responsible might be someone from Mexico who had since returned. The sheriff explained that while this theory could explain why the fingerprints didn't match anyone in the national database, he remained cautious, noting that this was just one of the many leads they were investigating. In 2010, it was reported that a new detective, Sergeant Tony Turnbull, who had been a friend of Jeff's, had taken over the investigation. Turnbull revealed that he believed the white van found in the river was definitely connected to Jeff's murder and that Alan and Nicole had likely died before Jeff pulled the van over. Crystal also spoke to the media, sharing her own theory that Jeff stumbled on something he wasn't supposed to see. He was taken by surprise and he was killed. Crystal said she continued to hope that someone would come forward with information for both her and Jake. She went on to say that Jake needs to know that what Jeff told him is true, that bad guys get punished for bad acts. In 2011, CBS 13 sat down with Sergeant Turnbull to discuss the case further. This time, Turnbull elaborated on his theory about what happened. He said that he believed Jeff approached the van after pulling it over, but that the driver didn't want Jeff to discover that Alan and Nicole's bodies were hidden inside. The driver was likely on his way to dispose of the bodies to cover up their deaths. Turnbull speculated that the driver may have a criminal history and was determined not to go back to prison, which would provide a strong motive for killing Jeff. He told CBS, quote, "Somebody who's wanted, who has a criminal history, who all of a sudden has 2 bodies in a van. How are they going to explain that away?" It was possible that Jeff had seen the bodies and tried to arrest the driver, leading to a struggle in which the driver overpowered Jeff and shot him before fleeing the scene and heading directly to the river. Now, I want to mention something quick while we're on this topic, but I'm also going to give a disclaimer. CBS 13 reported that on the other side of the river was the property where Alan and Nicole had planned on going camping. However, I do want to point out that CBS 13 is the only place that I read about this information, so it's unclear how true it really is. But if it is true, it could be compelling for a multitude of theories. If you're to believe that Alan and Nicole were not involved, maybe they had just lost their bearings and they went into the river as they were trying to go to the campsite and this tragic accident involving carbon monoxide poisoning happened. Or if they were in fact involved with Jeff's death, they could have been fleeing the area, hoping to get to the campground as fast as possible, maybe deciding to take this shortcut, and that's where they accidentally killed themselves. So it could work for either theories, but I wanted to mention it because it would make sense, depending on what you believe, either or, that Alan and Nicole were in fact heading that way because they were going to their final destination, and it wasn't something where their bodies and their van was just dropped at a random site by another killer. This may suggest that whatever happened, it only involved Alan and Nicole, because how would the killer or killers know where to drop them? How would they know where to bring them unless they were close acquaintances? And then in that case, what we're going to talk about next will make a lot more sense. So in this interview, Turnbull went on to say that investigators believe more than one person was involved, and they have a, quote, pretty good idea of who is responsible. However, linking the killers to the crime scene has been the biggest challenge, especially given the lack of DNA evidence and eyewitnesses. Turnbull went on to say that they need people with information to come forward so they can finally make an arrest. Now, Crystal also spoke to CBS 13, stating, quote, "I don't have any faith that these people are going to, on their own, come forward." Yet she remained hopeful that justice would be served, and she said, quote, "What I have faith in is that the people who know what these people did are going to find it somewhere in their hearts to come forward." Unfortunately, those people did not come forward, and years have passed without any significant updates. Now, during that time, the Sheriff's Department has resubmitted all evidence for new testing using advancements in technology, but as far as I can tell, nothing has come from this. In 2020, Sergeant Turnbull sat down with ABC 10 to discuss where Jeff's case was at currently. He said, quote, "After 14 years, we have made a lot of strides. To say there are no suspects or persons of interest would be lying to you. We've looked at people strongly, and they have not been ruled out yet." He explained that while they felt close to making an arrest, they still needed, quote, "something or somebody to get them over the top." Again, Crystal also spoke with ABC 10, this time sharing how she keeps Jeff's memory alive by participating in memorial bike rides and mentoring other surviving spouses who have lost partners in the line of duty. This is absolutely incredible. To think that she still doesn't have answers of what happened to her own loved one, and yet she's still willing to go out and help others. It just tells you what kind of woman Crystal is. Now, unfortunately, after that interview, there have been no major updates in Jeff's case. Though nearly 18 years have passed since his murder, Jeff's memory lives on. The road where he was killed has been renamed the Jeffrey Mitchell Memorial Roadway, and there is a memorial area set up at the site where this tragic incident took place. It has a fenced-off cross, a palm print from his son, and a bench inscribed with the words, "In loving memory of Deputy Jeff Mitchell." Now, in addition to that memorial, in El Dorado Hills, there's a baseball field named Deputy Jeff Mitchell Field, which honors Jeff's legacy and his love for the sport. And on top of that, there's a photo of the Mitchell family that hangs in the homicide unit of the Sacramento County Sheriff's Department. So wherever you look in that community, Jeff Mitchell has not been forgotten. And just to make sure that nobody forgets, each year on October 27th, the Sacramento Sheriff's Office posts an in memoriam for Jeff. Their post in October of 2023 concluded with a somber statement, and I want to end this story by reading it for you now. "To this day, we still do not know what happened on that fateful night. The killer of Deputy Mitchell remains at large. Sheriff's Department detectives are still diligently working this heinous crime that continues to haunt this community." Okay, so let's round this episode out by talking about some of the potential theories and how they align with what I discussed throughout this episode. Not only the story itself, but some of the things I weighed in on as we were covering the case. The first one, we can make it really fast here. One theory, this is the wrong van. It's a really, really shitty circumstance where you have this red herring that lines up perfectly, and you had all these resources and all these officers going down this road, and it has nothing to do with Jeff's murder. That's a possibility, right? It's not 100% that this is in fact the van based on what we know. Now, what they know internally, that could be a different story, but I've given you multiple reasons, reasonable doubt, if you will, to come to a conclusion that this may not be the van. I don't know if that's the case, but I don't know how we could sit here and say it's not at least a possibility. Very unlikely, considering the circumstances and the fact that this van was found when it was found, where it was found. It does line up, but I just have to put it out there. That is something we have to consider. The second theory would be that this involves no one other than Alan and Nicole, and what truly happened to Jeff Mitchell died with Alan and Nicole in that river. I know that we talked about the family and friends of Alan, and although he had a criminal history, he was never known to be violent or have a problem with officers. Desperate people in desperate times can do desperate things. So could something have happened that night that we're unaware of where Alan decided that he could not go to jail? I don't know what that would have been. Maybe it was just the interaction between him and Deputy Mitchell. There could be a situation where Jeff got him out of the car, brings him back to his vehicle. He's patting him down. Alan sees an opportunity and he takes advantage of it. After fleeing the scene, they're trying to get back to the campground or trying to get to the campground. Alan's in a rush. He decides to take this shortcut. I do that in air quotes for anybody on audio. He goes into the river. He's stuck. He's panicking. He's revving the engine multiple times. The windows are up. The car's filling with carbon monoxide. And in the process of doing so, they both pass out and they die right in that river. And unfortunately, all of the answers involving this case die with them. And the final scenario, which appears to be the most plausible only because I have to take Turnbull at his word, is that Alan and Nicole were already dead. And I have some major issues with this theory, but let's just go through it. There are other people in the vehicle. Let's just say one for the sake of this story. Deputy Mitchell goes up to the car. He sees something that's off. His spidey sense goes up. He gets this person out of the car, and that person gets the drop on him. They're able to get his gun. They shoot him, and then they decide to take the van, drive it 26, 27 miles away, and they dump the vehicle in the river and make it look like Alan was driving the car by placing his body back into the driver's seat. Or if you want to play it out, there could have been a second person where Deputy Mitchell is interacting with the driver outside the vehicle. The other person gets out and then gets the drop on him, and it's 2-on-1, which is also possible. But either scenario, they flee the area. They drive this van near the campground where Alan and Nicole were supposed to be. They drop the car there. They rev the engine a couple times, make it maybe even fill up with carbon monoxide again. And Alan and Nicole die right there, and the two suspects flee the area, never to be seen again. But as I mentioned in the beginning, and I'm not doing this to discredit Sergeant Turnbull or the Sheriff's Department working this case, they know way more than me, and they've come out publicly and said that they believe they know who did this. They just need a little bit more, and they believe there will be an arrest. But the reality of the situation is that was years ago, and there have been no arrests. So it can't be that compelling that they haven't taken a shot at him yet or a shot at them yet. So I wonder what's the holdup here? Why haven't they pulled the trigger, if you will, on this case? If it is someone that's connected to Alan and Nicole, I believe, if we're reading between the lines, what most likely happened is during their investigation, the sheriffs were able to put together that Alan and Nicole were not alone. There were other people with them, maybe friends, family members, acquaintances, who knows? It was a van. There very well could have been other people in the car. And they have deduced that list to maybe one or two people, and those individuals have not been able to give an alibi that clears them of any wrongdoing. But as I've said on many cases before, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. So just them not having an alibi is not enough to make an arrest. I understand that. So we're faced with this dilemma where officers potentially know who's involved, but they don't have any evidence to actually link them to the crime. Could that be what we're looking at here? Of course, it wouldn't be the first case, but like I said, I have some major issues with this one. Let's go back to the carbon monoxide poisoning and let's play out this scenario that other people are involved. Real quick, not trying to discredit what everyone has done in this case, but we got to think outside the box. And if we're not questioning the conclusions that investigators are coming to, we're not doing our job. We're not here to be an echo chamber. We're here to offer our own opinions, impartial opinions, and we're trying to be as objective as possible because we may say something that actually triggers something in the investigator's mind who are actually working this case. So this is the problem that I have here. Maybe the biggest problem besides the plate. If we're to believe that Alan and Nicole were dead prior to the traffic stop, they would have been killed, per the autopsy, by carbon monoxide poisoning. So you want me to believe that the person who killed them in a way that is normally associated with an accident or suicide, and yet in doing that, they then decided to take the bodies and transport them to another location, which would make it look like a homicide. So if someone intentionally killed these two people, they did it in a way where they could have walked away clean, but now they involved themselves in a situation where they could be stopped by police while the bodies are still in the vehicle, which is exactly what may have happened here. So it's very contradictory. If you had told me that Alan and Nicole both had gunshot wounds or had been stabbed or strangled, no brainer. Somebody killed them and they dumped their bodies. But what you want me to believe here is that they were killed in a way that would appear to be potentially self-inflicted, and then they were stopped while the bodies were being transported. And even though the quote-unquote suspects killed Officer Mitchell, Deputy Mitchell, they then decided to bring the van to a river and then stage it again to make it look like Alan and Nicole were the only individuals involved. Sure, if that's what you say. It's very convoluted, it's very complicated, and it seems like a lot to me. Is that why this case hasn't been solved? I don't know. But I do have some serious questions, and the only way we're ever going to get answers is by continuing to cover this case and continuing to talk about it. And I'm hoping that as this 18-year anniversary approaches, that if deputies are right, and there is someone out there who knows what happened, even if they weren't directly involved, for some reason, something happens internally and they finally decide to come forward, which is why I'm going to give you a recap right now. Deputy Jeff Mitchell was on patrol at 3:27 a.m. on October 27, 2006, near Meiss and Dillard Road in Sacramento County, California, when he pulled over a suspicious white Chevy van that was missing a license plate, allegedly. At some point after that, Jeff was involved in a violent struggle with the suspect, during which time he was shot with his own weapon. Approximately 12 hours later, the van that was potentially involved in this entire incident was found submerged in 18 inches of water in the Consumnes River with the bodies of 2 people inside. Anyone with information is asked to contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. And as always, my final words go out to Deputy Jeff Mitchell's family. That includes Crystal, that includes Jake, and that includes his mother, Mary Kay, who has been very vocal about this case. I say it all the time, and I said it even in this episode, the ability to move forward with this lack of resolution is incredible to me. It's amazing what human beings can endure, and your entire family are prime examples of that. And I know what Mary Kay said earlier in this episode as far as keeping this story alive, making sure that people do not forget about it, and I could not agree with her more. As a community, we all have to do our part to make sure that everyone knows the name Deputy Jeffrey Mitchell. And although we're a small part of it, I'm hoping that eventually everyone coming together and doing their own little small part will amount to something big. And I can't wait till that day comes, because I will be the first one covering it right here, so you guys know we've made a difference and we've had an impact, and Crystal, Jake, and Mary Kay finally have answers. But until that day comes, that's going to do it for me. Everyone stay safe out there. You guys have a good night. I'll see you next week.